But first, there's a saying that all politics is personal. And we've seen that over the past few weeks, with Question Time dominated, the media convulsed, and the government consumed by what to do about personal misbehaviour. Some recent, some ancient, some criminal, some claims, some merely foul and intended to demean. At the heart of it has been the conversation, not just in federal parliament, but right around the country, about what this means for women in particular. As you know, I spent 16 years working in Parliament House in Canberra. I'm not alone amongst staff who have worked there or who are working there right now tonight to say I regard it as one of the great privileges of my life to have been a political staffer. With one notable exception, in the 7 offices I worked in, all were led by honourable and decent men and women, people who could have done almost anything in life. But they decided that running for office and the sacrifices that came with it was a calling, something they profoundly believed in. I know there's a lot of staff in the building at the moment. I know they feel ashamed by recent events, even though they've never been anything other than professional. Liberal staffers, Labor staffers, National Party and crossbench staff. It's a workplace like no other, where you have a rare insight into the inner workings of our nation's democracy, where you have a role in shaping the big issues of our time, and where you come across, as a daily matter of course, some of our country's most extraordinary people. Those who have seen great triumph, and those who have seen tragedy and disaster firsthand. As I said, it's a privilege like no other. But with that privilege comes great responsibility. Given the hours, the pressure, the intellectual workload, these are not jobs for everyone. For some, they're jobs they should never have had or been allowed to have in the first place. In the Howard years, I worked for ministers and was later a minister's chief of staff at cabinet level. I didn't have much oversight of staffing beyond our office, and it wasn't until the opposition years of Malcolm Turnbull and then Tony Abbott that I had any understanding of the ins and outs of staffing. And that's because every position in opposition is formally allocated to the leader of the opposition's office. In government, they might be employed by Minister X or Minister Y, but in an overall sense, ministerial staff positions are allocated by the Prime Minister, or in practice, his office. I've never dealt with allegations of rape inside Parliament House in my time, and if I had, the lawyer in me, the woman in me, I can guarantee you, I would have dealt with it very, very differently. But the filthy behaviour of some male staff masturbating over the desks of their MP employers because it's reported some of those MPs voted against same-sex marriage, it didn't surprise me. It sickened me. It sickened me, as I'm sure it sickened you, but it didn't surprise me. I'm going to tell you something now that I've never said publicly. When I was in the Leader of the Opposition's office, this is in the opposition years, I had reason to recommend the sacking of a staff member for lying and disloyalty, not in our office, in another office. When the MP cleaned out the former staffer's desk and the computer, that MP uncovered evidence that for many months, that staffer had regularly met with other men during the middle of the day while the MP was in question time for orgies in political offices. Labor staffers, not just this coalition man, and a number of others too. I asked the then Leader of the Opposition to reinstate the old Howard Government Staff Committee to vet staffing appointments from here on in. He refused. But Tony Abbott understood that maintaining standards for staff was as much about keeping the good ones by weeding out the bad ones as it was stopping the employment of unsuitable players, the factional hacks and the bother boys in the first place. The man sacked by the Morrison government this week for his disgusting acts on his MP's desk and its distribution on a little chat group. How do you even think about doing that sort of crap at work? That bloke, I demanded to be sacked years earlier for disloyalty, for lying, for leaking against his boss. Now that bloke, it's not the same as the man I told you about in the orgies. That was another circumstance. But the bloke that was sacked this week was someone I sacked many years earlier. He never forgave me for it. Backgrounded to journalists about me that I was a bitch, too tough, all the stuff you've heard before. But you never heard my side of it, did you? I sacked him and I said he would never be back while I worked in that building. Turnbull rolled Abbott, I was gone and he was back. He's not the only one. The other three that Peter Van Onselen broke in his story earlier this week, I know who you are. I see you. The former minister, who it is alleged had his male prostitutes delivered to Parliament House by this spiteful gang, signed in and all kept quiet. Former minister, I see you too. For years, I copped hit after hit from unnamed sources about staff being vetted and complaints that I'd knocked back applicants from some ministers. Yes, I did. And I stand by every decision I made to knock them back. And I would do it all again. What you have seen in recent weeks is why I did it. And as a woman, boy, I made some enemies. I've never publicly spoken about my side before. But given where we are, given the recent issues regarding women, given the anger so many good staff feel today about the poor reputations they are copping over the behaviour of a few, I'm not going to stand silent anymore. After Abbott was removed, Malcolm Turnbull reversed many of the former Prime Minister's rules about staffing, where they could be based, wherever they liked. They could be flown around the country by the taxpayer. That was the new rule. More often than not, of course, up the front of the plane. The amounts they were paid increased exponentially. Abbott's ban on MPs not being able to hire their immediate family wasn't enforced. The Staff Selection Committee to vet appointments, the one that we brought back under Tony Abbott, well, that fell by the wayside. And the bloke I sacked, as I said, came back, and dozens more like him. Mid-career women of ability, lost out in roles to well-connected factional 20-somethings with not much on their CV of note other than the ability to stack branches. Much of the current mess on the ministerial blue carpet for the coalition is a legacy from the Turnbull years. And you can rest assured I'll be getting out every file note, every document, every bit of paper from my 16 years so that when I speak with Kate Jenkins, who is doing this review on culture, I'll do my best to help drive change, not just for women who are staffers, but for all staff, all the good ones on the left. And I dealt with many good staff in the Labor ranks, as much as I will speak up for staff on the right. Staff in these political offices, good staff who are there because they believe in something bigger than themselves. I want things to change, but it's got to be changed for the better, not just change to get the PM off the hook, or politically correct change that could just as easily weaken the culture in that place rather than improve it. On quotas, for the PMs clutching at them as a possible way out of this mire, I'm not so sure what they could have done here to improve things. In the case of Brittany Higgins, for example, the three people handling her claims or mishandling them, as the case may be, all of them, 2 ministers, 1 chief of staff, all of them female. Of course, I want to see more women in public life, but I want them to advance on merit, not gender. And I certainly don't want to see anyone who's decent and deserving kept out or held back now in retribution for mistakes of the past. If I'm honest, the real problem in Canberra is not too few women, although that is a problem. Too few people of substance, too few genuine patriots, too many game players there and not enough dedicated servants of our country, too many people who've lived their whole adult life in a political bubble and have never gained perspective living in the real world. Too many people who put their career before good causes and their preferment above principle, who've spent their whole life manipulating numbers and building factions and studying focus groups rather than working out what they believe in and why public life has purpose and meaning beyond their own individual success. These are my first comments on incidents in the past. They will not be my last.